Well, good morning, everyone. I am thrilled to see how many of us not only remembered to set our clocks ahead an hour for daylight savings, but we're also focused enough to come today. Yeah, we were focused enough to come despite losing a whole hour of sleep. Does anyone but me feel a little bit unfocused? Just a smidge? Yeah, because I normally on a Sunday, I'll get up. I'm supposed to get up at 5. I usually open my eyes at 4:30. I opened my eyes at the new 4:30 today. So yeah, I thought I was focused until I got here and found out, no, I'm not, because I dropped all the balls. But I've picked them up and I think we'll get through it. Now, if you're still sleepy, today's talk, it should wake you up. I cannot think of anything more inspiring or more awakening than guilt and shame. I know it doesn't sound exciting, but for the next 5 weeks, we're going to be doing some really important and transformative stuff. Last week, we let go of the last of the anger that we've been holding on to in a really powerful exercise, right? Wasn't that a beautiful way to do it? Yeah. If you weren't here, you missed something really special, and you can still participate. I've still got the supplies. We wrote down all of the anger that we've been holding on to, whether it's old or new. We wrote it all down, and then we released each one into bowls of water, and they magically dissolved. Both the paper and the anger dissolved and were washed away so that we could enter life again, free of anger. And now we know that that initial impulse of anger is actually an alarm bell, right? It's alerting us to pause and take some time to figure out where it's coming from. Where is the fear or the unmet need or desire behind it? And it's also there to remind us to see the person on the opposite side of our anger through eyes of love, so that we can see where their stuff might be coming from, so we can respond from a place of patience and compassion. And hopefully we remember to do all of that before we have said or done something destructive from that angry place. In other words, over the previous 5 weeks, we cracked the anger code. We know how to use an anger impulse as a way to move toward love. And that's a skill that we may find that we really need as we start exploring guilt and shame, because it can both stir up a lot of feelings. Both of those can, including but not limited to anger. There's a lot involved. So you may want to keep those little wolf keychains that I passed out last week. Keep them handy. He's got it. You're going to want to pop those little bubbles. Excuse me a minute. I brought the frogs up with me. You're going to want to sit and pop those little bubbles. It's a fidget. And instead of reacting while I'm speaking, that'll help you find some silence and clarity when you start feeling vulnerable. And if you didn't get one, come and see me or any of the choir members after the service. They're in there. We'll give you one. I've got some left. And remember that allowing yourself to feel vulnerable can be a beautiful and productive thing. It's a path toward new understanding and vision, but it can feel really uncomfortable for our ego. And when ego's uncomfortable, it wants everyone else to be uncomfortable too, right? So use those keychains to keep ego busy. It's rather like a child, right? Just distract the child with the keychain so you can focus on your growth. Because when we're coming from a place of guilt or shame, we're limiting ourselves and others in really, really huge ways. And we're all familiar with the kind of guilt and shame that keeps us awake at night, right? Does anyone else find that your brain wakes up just as you go to bed? Yeah? And our brains, have you noticed they have a really rude tone at night? They get really nasty, don't they? I found this cartoon yesterday that illustrates exactly what I mean by rude. And I'm going to read it for you folks online or in the back who can't see the screen over here. It's from a series called We're Out of Cornflakes, which I'd never heard of before. And the first frame is a drawing of a brain with arms and a face. And that sounds really alarming now that I say it out loud. But I promise you it isn't. It's a cartoon, I promise, so stay with me here. The first frame is this little brain dude, and he says, "Hey, Steve, it's me, your brain. You awake?" The second frame is a man laying in bed in his jammies, all nice and cozy, and he says, "No, idiot, it's midnight." The third frame is the brain again, and he says, "Remember when you were 12 and accidentally farted in front of Janet Schlorgen? I bet 20 years later she still thinks about it every day." And the last frame is the guy still in bed, but now with his eyes wide open. Anyone else ever had that experience? Now, I'm not talking about farting on Janet Schlorgen, right? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about laying in bed and your brain decides to pipe up with all sorts of nonsense and noise. And then you lay there and you're unable to sleep as your brain prattles on about all kinds of stuff from when you were little. And no, I'm not speaking from personal experience. Stuff from when you were wee, right? My brain will pull all kinds of stuff up and going, why am I looking at that right now? It was several decades ago. We're not going to say how many, okay? But it keeps going on until we're too anxious to sleep at all. That's some of what we're going to be looking at through this series, but it's really only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to guilt and shame. There is more to it that I even realized until recently. So I ordered several new books for the series because I do that. And they're each filled with different perspectives, and some of them are radically different from each other. And although I will use something from each of them as we go from week to week, I wanted to start everything off lightly by sharing part of this story from Jane Middleton-Moz in the first chapter of her book, Shame and Guilt, Masters in Disguise. And it took everything in me not to put a picture of Dana Carvey in costume in the movie Masters of Disguise. I didn't do it. I curbed the impulse. But I'm thinking that if I tell you part of this story, it'll help us start thinking about how guilt and shame are being used or are playing out in our lives and the lives of the people around us. See if you can recognize yourself or some people that you know in this story, because when we realize that on some level, all of us are controlled by or controlling others through guilt and shame, we find another way to feel oneness as our reality. So she says, once upon a time, not long ago, in the kingdom of the universe, there lived a giant and his mate, Chameleon. They lived in a house set high on a hill above a village called the world. Giant and Chameleon rarely spoke to each other, or anyone else for that matter. Chameleon was very shy and lived, so she believed, only to please Giant. Giant, because of his great stature, acted as though he were superior to everyone else, including Chameleon. He seldom spoke to anyone, and when he did, it was almost always to correct others, to brag about his generosity and his great strength and his long list of accomplishments. And when others would dare to question him or criticize his bullying behavior, Giant would become enraged. He would remind them of his power and retreat to a space which no one dared enter. Giant was only comfortable, completely alone, or in total control. When Chameleon ventured into town, she felt frightened and vulnerable. Unlike Giant, Chameleon thought herself to be less than everyone else in almost every way. Being with others made her feel self-conscious. She felt proud of Giant, and the little pride she had in herself was that he had chosen her as his mate. Without him next to her, she felt worthless and unlovable. When there was no choice but to be around others, Chameleon would hide inside herself and study them. She watched their gestures, studied their moods, listened attentively to their beliefs and concerns, attempting to do whatever was expected of her. She was very good at becoming what others thought she should be. She held others in awe and also feared them. The smallest conflict terrified her, which made her feel even more ashamed because she was afraid. By watching others and correcting herself to fit the image of her desires, she could become invisible in their presence. Invisibility was her safety, yet she felt angry after she became invisible. She often found herself mulling over these interactions long after a brief meeting. Sometimes in the evening, she would talk to Giant about the people she had met. Together, they would judge the other's weaknesses. Giant relished these times of lecturing and criticizing the others with Chameleon. Chameleon only felt guilty for her behavior. She needed to speak of their good points. But these discussions always seemed to bring Giant closer to her in a way he rarely was. It was clear that he felt they were better than others, as if it were the two of them against the world. It terrified Chameleon to think that Giant might someday see that she was more unlovable and flawed than any of those they relished in judging. She always took great pride to hide her tail. She believed that if he saw her tail, he'd wonder why he'd chosen her. Chameleon wanted a child more than anything, but Giant didn't want children. He felt that they'd interrupt that life he'd grown so fond of. He had taken good care of Chameleon. He'd protected her. And in return, she had worshiped him. He had given her everything. Why do you need a child? He would ask. Am I not enough? But Chameleon's pleas only became more desperate. She begged Giant repeatedly to grant her this one desire. He'd walk away and she would dissolve into sobs, but her tears pulled at a place in his heart that Giant hadn't felt since childhood, a place only his mother had exposed, a place that frightened him. And so eventually he agreed to let her have a child. The first and only child Giant and Chameleon had was born in the winter. Chameleon was overjoyed. As she gazed upon her child, she felt intense pride. She knew her daughter would be strong, beautiful, talented, intelligent, everything Chameleon had only dreamed of being. She examined her newborn daughter carefully. She saw no flaws and therefore no tail. She knew her daughter would not be imperfect like she was. Chameleon tried to remember if she had a tail at birth or if it and her coloring developed later. She couldn't remember. But she was satisfied that her precious daughter would become a giant even more grand than her mate and her mother had been. She named her daughter after her mother and Giant's grandmother. Her name was Perfect Giant. This beautiful little child would soon become the companion she'd always wanted. She would be someone to talk to, someone to love her unconditionally in the way that no one, including her own family, ever had. Perfect would never be the disappointment Chameleon had been to her own mother. Her daughter would admire her and give her respect. At last, Chameleon would be the center of someone's world. In return, Chameleon would give Perfect everything. Perfect occupied all of Chameleon's time. Giant became more and more depressed, and mysteriously, he kept getting smaller. She doesn't need me any longer, he thought. I'm no longer the center of her world. So he would stay locked in his room day and night. Soon, Giant and Chameleon weren't talking at all. Although she felt a bit rejected, Chameleon never asked Giant questions, fearing that he would leave her or demand time that was now devoted to Perfect. She knew he could take care of himself. Besides, her baby girl needed her, and Perfect met her needs for companionship more than Giant ever had. Chameleon slept in Perfect's room. She would talk to her daughter while she slept, telling her all about her sorrows. When Perfect woke, she would gaze intently into her mother's eyes. For the first time, Chameleon was the center of another's world. Her tail no longer bothered her. In fact, it seemed to be disappearing. When Perfect would cry, Chameleon felt irritated, but eventually she began to laugh at her child's tears. You have no reason to cry, silly girl. You're strong, tough, beautiful, and gifted. I give you everything I have and more. Don't you realize that you can't possibly have needs that aren't being fulfilled? As the years passed, Giant kept shrinking, while Chameleon's tail seemed to vanish altogether, and Perfect, with only a few stumbling blocks here and there, met all of her mother's expectations for her. When any signs of weakness appeared in her child, Chameleon would either cry or laugh at her daughter's imagined needs or fears, and like magic, I couldn't snap. Still can't. Did it! See, I told you I couldn't. Like magic, the unwanted emotions seemed to vanish. Perfect grew into the exquisitely beautiful giant her mother had imagined. She paid great attention to her body and her appearance. She studied diligently. She listened to her mother's troubles day and night, let her mother select her friends from only the very best giants, and entertained her mother with great charm. Perfect never left home without making certain first that she looked her best. Perfect had learned early how dependent Chameleon was on her. She loved her mother, and it pained her to see her mother's reaction when she would somehow disappoint her. When upset, Chameleon would dissolve into sobs and seem to shrink, getting smaller and smaller. After all, Perfect often thought when her mother's demands tired her, she's given me her whole life. Perfect even bought her mother roses for her own birthday to thank her for her very birth. Perfect rarely saw her father. He hid most of the time in his den. Chameleon warned her daughter not to bother her father because she could see that he had turned into a dragon. Sometimes, however, Perfect's curiosity would get the best of her and she'd enter her father's den. Most of the time, Giant would be extremely irritable and his temper would frighten Perfect. But sometimes Giant looked small and very sad. And so when she was still quite young, she'd enter his cave and try to spend time with him, but he never seemed to understand her, laughing at her awkwardly instead of hearing and laughing with her. When she was older, Perfect discovered that the one thing that would really please her father was to listen to his stories. Over and over, he would tell her of his past accomplishments, expound on his generosity, and lecture her endlessly on the lessons life taught. For those brief periods of time, her father would be his giant self again, and the fire-breathing dragon he had become would disappear. She would listen in a daze until sometimes she almost fell asleep. Sometimes it seemed as if he was talking to somebody else. He was no longer aware of her, but it still felt good to be allowed to spend time with him. It felt good to be silent and let him talk. She felt ashamed of herself for her past childishness and how she'd made him laugh at her when she spoke. For she was a giant and she should have known better. She should have known that speaking made her appear stupid to him. One spring day at the end of her last year of school, little Perfect's perfect world became imperfect. She had been eating very little the entire week before, so she'd been particularly tired and confused when she'd taken her final exam in her best subject. Now, she sat frozen in her seat as the failing grade stared almost accusingly up at her. Quick calculations told her that her grade in the class would not be perfect. Mediocre, she thought, shocked and terrified. She'd never been mediocre before. Her mother would fall apart. Her father would scream. The bell had barely rung before Perfect was out of her seat. She ran and ran, not caring where. She felt herself becoming smaller and smaller. All she had been given had been a waste. How could anyone tolerate average? No giant would want her, not that she had interest in anyone. Her whole life centered on pleasing her mother and doing her studies. Perfect ran deep into the woods until she could run no more. She laid down on the grass and cried and cried. She tried to stop, but she couldn't. Giants didn't cry, she thought. Giants are strong. Giants are superior. Her shame grew while she continued to shrink. I've never been strong. I've always been stupid and weak, she cried. A voice spoke. Can I help you in some way? It seemed to come out of nowhere. Who are you? Perfect stuttered, wanting to fall right through the earth. It was bad enough that a giant was weeping, but now someone was seeing her weakness. She felt herself turn a new strange color and could sense a tail beginning to grow where none had ever been. I'm a human being, the voice answered. You seem to be upset. Is there anything I can do to help? Perfect had heard of human beings, but never known one. Her father said they were a much lower life form. Although she had feared them in days gone by, her mother seemed to fear them less than giants. Humans were mostly average and had no ambitions to move to the high places. Perfect had sometimes watched them from her high place. They played and sang, laughed and cried openly. She saw them sometimes touching each other's hearts and sometimes getting angry. They appeared to her almost shameless. She was jealous of them at times, and then she was ashamed of her jealousy. After all, she was a giant, although in that moment she didn't feel like one. I can't let you see me like this, Perfect muttered. I've been crying. I look terrible. My eyes are red and she searched for words as she carefully hid her tail. I'm not up for visitors. She crawled further into the tall grass until she became invisible. No one should be alone when they're sad, human being replied. I haven't noticed anything wrong with your appearance. You look fine exactly as you are. I do? Perfect whispered. She had often been told that she was a beauty, and also sometimes that she was silly, stupid, selfish, and at times even fat, but no one had ever said, fine, just the way she was. Well, of course you do. Do you need to look a particular way to be comforted when you're sad? I'm not supposed to be sad, Perfect said. Giants are never sad. Giants? Human being questioned. You're not a giant. I'm not? Perfect queried sadly. She began to feel smaller. She realized that her color was changing even more, and that must also mean that her tail was growing longer. I must have turned into a chameleon, she said to herself. Mother will be devastated. Father will be enraged. You're a human being, like everyone else, human being replied, wondering what she'd meant by her statement. He'd heard that some of those who lived in high places thought they were different, better than others. Perhaps she was one of them. A human being, she cried. Well, of course you are. All of us who live in the world are human beings. I've heard stories about giants, but I've never seen one. Certainly you don't think you're a giant. You look just like me. See for yourself. There's a pool not far behind you. Look at your reflection. Perfect crawled deeper into the tall grass until she came to a clearing that surrounded a clear pond. She carefully crawled to the edge of the pond and looked into the water. And there before her, she saw the reflection of a young woman. It was definitely a human being who stared back at her. Do you see? Perfect heard the voice call. Come on out. Let me see you. I won't hurt you. Let's just talk a while. Are you trying to trick me? Perfect asked, crawling back to her place in the grass, still afraid to come out. No, of course not, human being replied. I've met others who've come to this place thinking that they were something else. One fellow thought he was a rat, another a pig, and another a mouse. All were human beings. But I've looked at mirrors. I've never seen myself like this, she said. Most mirrors reflect back what you think yourself to be. The pool of water you just looked into is the pond of clarity. It shows you as you are. Most are afraid to look. They're afraid to see. There's more to that story, and we're going to look at some of it next week. But did you recognize people you know in that story? Did you maybe recognize some moments in your own life, even? Like Precious, we are not the things others have told us we are. Not the compliments, and also not the teasing or the angry words. We are not those things and never have been. We could never be. And we're definitely not the things we tell ourselves we are. The inner voice is far louder and far meaner than anyone else's words have ever been or could be. And yet we believe them all. Every one of them, right? It is time to stop doing that. Let me ask you something. Most of you have spent some time with me when I'm not up here doing this and sounding so smart, right? So you have an idea of who I am and what I'm about, right? Okay. So those of you who know me, and I'll say here that if you haven't spent any time with me, come to any of the events in the bulletin. I'm here 4 nights a week, leading classes and services and rehearsals, plus most of every Sunday, so get to know me and the rest of us who are here all week long. But for those who do know me, let me ask you, do you believe me when I say that I know God is real and present and behind all things? I'm not asking you to believe if you believe. I'm not asking you to say that you believe what I believe. I'm asking you if you believe that I am being honest when I say that I know for myself without an iota of doubt that there is a divine love behind all that exists. Do you believe that when I say it? Okay. Do you believe me when I say that I trust that there is a divine hand guiding everything down to the smallest detail? Do you believe me when I tell you that I have seen and experienced things that support my trust in that divine hand guiding things over and over again? Yes. And this one is for the folks who've really spent a lot of time with me. Do you believe that the person I am when I'm up here speaking is the same person with the same beliefs when I'm down on the ground living life? If you have said yes to those things about me, and I've heard a lot of yeses, then please hear me when I speak another truth that I know with every part of me. One that you've heard me say over and over, but which you maybe haven't been ready to believe yet. You are enough. You are beautiful. You've always been perfectly you, exactly as you were meant to be. Maybe there have been people in your life who've looked at you from their perspective, clouded with their own self-doubt and judgments and opinions, and they've told you something different. And maybe you believed them, and maybe you still do. But today, and for the next 4 weeks, if you can't yet see it for yourself, if you can't believe it as being true in your own mind, please believe that I see you as you really are. I'll believe it for you until you can believe it for yourself. I see how amazing and precious you are, and that you always have been. I see you, and you amaze me. Every single one of you, online or in person. I don't have to see your face or know your name to know that you're incredible. God can only do amazing, and God made you, so you're amazing. Stop listening to the voices in your mind. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Let me introduce you to yourself as you've never seen before. Just be willing to see yourself as love and keep coming back. Thank you.